I'm Karen Hardin, president of the Maricopa County branch NAACP. Like to welcome everyone to our monthly meeting. Just a few comments. I would like to let everyone know, if you can see, I am wearing my t-shirt today that says, "Never forget." There it is. Never forget. And it's in honor of Black Wall Street, Tulsa Black Wall Street in Oklahoma. Never forget massacre in 1921. And so I'm honoring all of those folks, 300 people who lost their lives and the families who lost their livelihood because of internal terrorism. Also, I would like for people to keep in mind that we saw internal insurrection January the 6th. And I make note of whenever I hear people reporting on it, I do not hear people mentioning that 5 people lost their lives. It's unconscionable that we could have that type of a thing happen in the United States, as well as what happened in Tulsa, and there's no repercussion for it. So I'd like for us to all keep that in mind as we talk about all of the things that are happening in the country, the threats to our democracy, and you know, a special thoughts for the people who lost their lives and their homes and their property in Tulsa 100 years ago, and no consideration for that atrocity. And we cannot let this keep continuing, right? When are we going to be able to speak up and make sure that our democracy is not destroyed? So thank you again for coming. Today, we're going to talk about gerrymandering, which ties into voter suppression. Thank you to our Political Action Committee, who has put this program together for us today. And with that, I will turn the program over to Dr. Westenberg, who is the chair of our Political Action Committee, and encourage all of you to follow our website, www.maricopa.naacp.org. That way you can keep abreast of all the things that our branch is doing. So, Dr. Westenberg.
Thank you, Dr. Harden. I too would like to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. Our focus on gerrymandering is very, very pertinent to everything that is going on today. By any other name, it is indeed voter suppression. And as you well know, there are numerous measures in our state and across the country which are taking place as it relates to voter suppression. And it began, the process is a very complicated process as I began looking at it. So I'm looking to learn today more about gerrymandering, and especially in the state of Arizona. And so I would like to introduce to you Mr. John Moore, who is going to present information to us. He is an independent redistricting liaison. And as we move into that, Patrick Brown, who is on the Political Action Committee, will share a definition of gerrymandering, and then we are going to gather all of the information that Mr. John Moore is going to provide with us this afternoon. Thank you so very much. Patrick, please.
All right, good morning. It's still morning, everybody. Like you said, you know, gerrymandering it's a very insidious thing, especially when it comes to our democracy and our ability to vote. So today, like I said, today's meeting is we're going to be discussing gerrymandering. We're also going to be discussing the Arizona Independent Redistricting Committee. So getting an idea of like how this all works within the state of Arizona. Before we get into that, I wanted to kind of just make sure we were all on the same page when it comes to gerrymandering. So let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. So if you are an expert on gerrymandering and you know everything about this, then you will definitely get some added information out of this quick little kind of basics here. If you're not quite familiar with gerrymandering, or you heard the term, we want to make sure that you are very up to speed with how it works and what it's all about. So first question is like, what is gerrymandering? So simply put, gerrymandering is manipulating district lines, voter lines, in order to allow one political party to benefit over another. Typically, when you see gerrymandering, it happens when you have a particular political party in power, and as a result, they will try and kind of cut the lines into ways that benefit them. So we kind of have this graphic here that kind of gives you an idea of, like, just say you have, say, 50 precincts, but then, if it's all done equitably, then it's, the majority of a particular group will beat the other group. However, there are ways to manipulate how lines are drawn in order to provide an advantage for one group over another. Now, in Arizona, we have something called Independent Redistricting Commission, or the IRC. And John, want to hand things over to John. He's going to break down what they do. But like I said, we want to make sure you guys have a good primer of gerrymandering. So a little bit of history here. Gerrymandering goes back to the early days of American government. In 1812, was a guy by the name of Elbridge Gerry, who pretty much backed a plan to reform the district lines in his particular area in order to help his party during governor's race. And because of how one of the districts looked, they said it looked kind of like a strange salamander with wings. They kind of took Jerry's last name, added the salamander, and that's where we got the term gerrymandering from. So like I said, it's been going on for a long time. Now, moving to more modern times, every 10 years, we just completed the 10-year census. Every 10 years, what happens is that we have to do something that's called reapportionment. And what reapportionment does, it basically says that the 435 seats that are, there we go. The 435 seats that we have in the U.S. House, the House of Representatives, it's always going to be at 435. So in order to adjust for changes in population as a result of that the census, then we do what's called reapportionment, is we kind of shuffle the seats around. And so after that happens, then it drills down to states, legislative districts, city council districts, things of that nature. So this map you have here is is like the 2020 projections for congressional apportionments. And if you've been following along, Arizona was, at least theoretically, should have gained an additional congressional seat. However, based on how the census went down, and there's a lot to unpack with that issue, and so that may be a conversation for another time, but we did not gain an additional seat. And like I said, with this particular census, there was a lot of issues with of course, the COVID-19, people turning in their census forms, but also issues where there was no additional time for consideration because of COVID-19 and things like that. So that has impacted what would have happened with Arizona potentially getting an additional congressional seat. So real quick, what I want to do is I want to kind of go through the different types of gerrymandering that exists out there. So the first one is something called cracking. And what that basically means is that in order to reduce the voting power for a particular group or particular demographic or political party, what you do is you start splitting up the population and spreading the members out into different areas, thus diluting their voting strength or their electoral strength by just kind of splitting them up. Another one is that exists is something called packing. And that's what you do is when you basically pack all the opposition into one district or into fewer districts. So even though in numbers wise, one group might have like an electoral advantage or voting advantage, they end up being packed together, so that's completely diluted. So ultimately what ends up happening is it just reduces the influence of the remaining districts. So you may have a very solid group because it's all packed together, but then over other areas, because it's all packed into one area, their voting strength in other parts of, say, a county or state is then, of course, limited. Another one that exists, this one's called the sweetheart gerrymandering, and it's not really sweet at all, but how it works is it's kind of, and this is something you saw a lot in the past, where you had, both groups saying, all right, what we're going to do is we're going to agree to cut up our voting districts or our legislative districts in a way where your part of town will be covered, my part of town will be covered, and basically nothing changes. And so why this is problematic is that while the voting demographics or the options that folks want, the voters actually want, you have kind of, say, the incumbents deciding what we're going to do is we're going to create a situation where we both win, but we're not being responsive to what the actual voters and what the folks live in those districts want. And then finally, and this is another big one, it's called prison-based gerrymandering. And so what happens is that individuals who are incarcerated, they're counted towards the representation vote. However, the incarcerated folks are not allowed to vote themselves. And so often where you see this happening is you have areas that have smaller population of voters using the prison population in order to increase their electorate size, so they can get, of course, more votes or more representation and things like that. And so this has been a very problematic thing, because you may have, like I said, an area, like, say, smaller communities, smaller counties, smaller towns that are boosted by just having, prisons in that area. And of course, those incarcerated folks are not allowed to participate or vote in an election. So you get that type. So here's the thing. Now, one question people like to ask is, well, isn't gerrymandering illegal? Technically, yes, it is. However, it's had a real interesting history in our society. Partisan gerrymandering has been going on, as you guys saw from the earlier slides, since like the beginning of the United States. The courts, especially the Supreme Court, really didn't consider it so much of an issue until probably about the mid-'80s. But where you saw gerrymandering really just taking off was around the mid-'60s, after the Voting Rights Act, because once African Americans had voter protections that could vote, you started to see a lot of the southern states really going full tilt into gerrymandering, meaning either packing Black folks into districts where, okay, yeah, you'll get your one representative or you'll get your one city council member. However, we're going to make sure that we're going to make sure that you don't get, say, 5 city council seats, or you get any kind of, voting strength whatsoever. And it wasn't until probably about the 1980s where the court started to recognize that gerrymandering was getting so egregious and so bad that it was something where they needed to step in. Now, the thing that makes it really, really tricky with gerrymandering is, while, in the past, it was just, say, people in a room saying, okay, we're just going to draw up the map in a way to make it, advantageous to us. You're now starting to see things like computer software. You have different organizations that exist that are in the business of drawing maps. But of course, what they're doing is they are trying to slide under that very thin doorway of what is illegal or what could be considered gerrymandering, however, still trying to get the same impact. So while there are laws that exist, and while there are court remedies, and like I said, we'll talk about like how Arizona, handles redistricting, there is still a lot of issues when it comes to gerrymandering, or things that are tried to be passed or done in order to gerrymander, but then not make it obvious that you're gerrymandering. So real quick, before I hand things over to John, in Arizona, we have what we actually have. We will follow the same process as all the other states. We'll be redrawing the congressional legislative districts. Of course, that'll happen every 10 years. Now, with Arizona, it used to be our state legislature was responsible for creating our district lines and handling this job. However, in 2000, with Proposition 106, that's what created the independent Redistricting Committee. It's supposed to be a bipartisan committee, our commission that is responsible for creating those district lines in an equitable fashion. However, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to our guest speaker, John Moore, who's going to get into the details of the IRC. And then, like I said, if you guys have questions about what I've talked about or what John's talked about, please put them in the chat and we will definitely answer those either during the presentation or at the end. So John, I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to you. And if you have a PowerPoint, you'll be able to share your screen here in just a second.
All right, thank you, Patrick. And I do have a PowerPoint.
Okay, you should be able to share your screen now.
All right. Okay, thank you, Patrick, and thank you all for the invitation to be here. My name's John Moore. My wife and I moved to Goodyear about 4 years ago when I retired as a newspaper editor out of California, although I'm one of those rare folks who actually am an Arizona native. I was born in the Phoenix area, grew up here, and we moved out when I was in high school. So this was sort of a return home for me. Being in the newspaper business all of my life, I was very connected to politics and government. In fact, I went and got my master's in public policy and administration because it was an area that I was fascinated about. And so when I retired, I was able to step aside from the media perspective, which was one of trying to understand what was going on in politics and government and reflecting all sides of it in terms of reporting it and covering it and explaining it. And I wanted to stay involved. And so I became something of an advocate and joined up with our local Democratic Party and have become involved in Democratic Party since then, locally within our legislative district. And one of my newer roles is, unfortunately, like too many of us, I raised my hand at the wrong time and I became the liaison from our legislative district to the Independent Redistricting Commission as they go through their process this year. So that's a little bit of background about me. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the redistricting process. Patrick did a great job in talking about gerrymandering and the background of redistricting. And so we'll be able to breeze through that. In fact, I think I may see if I can steal some of those slides. They're pretty good. So it's a great explanation of gerrymandering. Then we'll talk about the Arizona's Independent Redistricting Commission, a little bit about how you can get involved, and then open it up to questions. And as Patrick suggested, if you would just put your questions in the chat, we'll be happy to get to as many of them as we can at the end of it. So redistricting, as Patrick really did a great job of explaining, is the process of determining what a representative democracy is all about. And it really is this concept of equal representation in legislative bodies. And it really is the sense that every American should have equal access to their elected official who represents them at whatever political body. So the question becomes is, how do we figure this out? How do you determine that? And we start in this country with the census. Every 10 years by constitution, we have to count supposedly everybody in the United States and determine where they live. Once the census is done, the next step is called apportionment, which we just completed several weeks ago, which is you take the total number of people in the United States, and then you take a look at the total number of people in each state. And from that, you determine how many representatives each state will have in the House of Representatives. You start with every state gets one. So then you have to figure out how the other 385 are apportioned, and it's based on population. The last step in it is redistricting, which is the sort of the same process, but you do it for the state legislature as opposed to for the United States Congress. And so we are now at the point where we are looking at redistricting. Patrick did a great job of talking about gerrymandering and how that has impacted this nation for so many years. And it's really, as he explained, the process of really carving up the lines in a form that benefits you, the person who's responsible for carving up the lines you and your party then benefit from gerrymandering. I wanted to use this map. I know it's kind of small, but right after the 2000 census, California, where I was living at the time, went through redistricting and reapportionment. And as you know, California has historically been a state that's run by Democrats. So this is gerrymandering. So it happens on all sides. This really benefited Democrats. And I want to show you, this is the congressional district that I was living and working in at the time. And this was Congressional District 23 in California. And the district, if you follow the dot, goes right up the coast. That's it. That little sliver is a singular congressional district that was carved out in California, and it benefited a Democratic incumbent. So this part of each of these counties that's back in here, a lot of that is less populated, a little more rural and conservative. And so they created a much larger Republican district in through here to that. So gerrymandering is really the sense of trying to carve up districts that benefit the people who do it. In Arizona, we have an independent redistricting commission. This goes back, as Patrick explained, to 2000, where the voters in Arizona approved Proposition 106 by a fairly substantial margin.
Hey, John,
Yes.
I apologize for interrupting. We're seeing your presenter view, and this is for some of our folks that are having a hard time seeing the
No
slides.
problem. Let me get
full
back
screen.
to see if I can get the full view up for you all.
Yeah, I think if you just click on display settings up there.
Whoops, wrong one. Well,
display settings is on near the top of the page.
well, I used to be able to do this back in my prime. No, I don't know what I'm doing here. Let's see. Patrick, give me some help as to where.
Along the top of your view, it says Show Taskbar, Display Settings, and In Slideshow.
Yeah, are you able to see that?
Display Settings.
On the left-hand side.
Now the thing is, John, I think you're probably, are you seeing like a full screen display on your end?
No, I'm seeing the presenter's view here.
Okay. Yeah. So where it says right above the main slide here, it has a little drop down that says display settings. If you click on that, it should give you an option to switch it to just to full screen.
Here, hang on just a second. Let me try something else here. I think part of the problem is I've got these for all that. So basically in 2000, Arizona voters passed Prop 106. And this created the Independent Redistricting Commission. And it took the power for drawing those districts away from the state legislature, and it gave it to this new commission that was established. And the key part of the language in that proposition, if you can read it, is it's that the commission was designed to create fair and competitive congressional and legislative districts in Arizona. Arizona is one of only 7 states that has this kind of a commission that does both the congressional and the legislative redistricting, and does it through an independent commission. All the other states either have some variation on that theme, or most states still allow their state legislatures to draw those boundaries, both in terms of Congress and in terms of state legislative districts. And that's important to understand because we really were one of the first to move to this new type of independent commission to draw these lines. This actually was challenged. You probably will not be surprised to learn that it was the Arizona legislature itself that challenged this commission, saying that it was illegal, that it took power away from them to create the district boundaries. This went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And a 2015 ruling, the United States Supreme Court approved the Arizona Independent Redistricting Commission. It was a 5-4 ruling, and Justice Ginsburg wrote the majority opinion. And part of her opinion said, Arizona voters sought to restore the core principle of Republican government, namely that the voters should choose their representatives, not the other way around. But what's important to remember in that is that there were 4 justices who opposed that, who said basically the power should rest with the state legislatures. So in theory, this might come back now that those 4 are in the majority of the United States Supreme Court. And it's something I think we were aware of and want to watch for as we move forward into the future. The commission in Arizona, 5 commissioners, no more than 2 of them can be of the same political party. And the first 4 are appointed. We'll go through that process in just a second. And no more than 2 shall be from the same county. The commissioners, and everybody in the state is eligible to apply for this position. It's voluntary. The commissioners must be a registered voter in Arizona, must have been in their political party for at least 3 years. Can't have been an elected official over the last 3 years, including as a precinct committee man, or have served as a political party officer. All of this is intended to try and establish the independence of this group of people. The 4 commissioners, not the chairman, but the 4 commissioners are appointed this way. The highest ranking official in the state House of Representatives, in this case, a Republican, gets the first appointment. Then the leader of the Democratic Party in the House gets an appointment. Then the leader of the Republican Party in the Senate, and then the leader of the Democratic Party in the Senate. Each of them get a single appointment. They make their appointments from a pool of candidates who are established by a commission in Arizona that's called the Arizona Judicial Assessment and Appointment Commission. They review applications, come up with a finalist, and then out of those finalists, they're chosen these 4 members. Those 4 members, we'll give you who they are, will then be the people who pick the chairman of the commission. So the 2 Democrats who are on the current commission, Dr. Shireen Lerner, she's from Maricopa County. She's an anthropology professor at Mesa Community College, been involved in Tempe government, both on their Census Committee, Parks and Rec Committee, Community Action Agency, and she's the former state historic preservation officer. Derek Watchman is the 2nd Democrat. He's from Apache County. He's president and owner of Sagebrush Hill Group. He's the chair of the National Center for the American Indian Enterprise Development, former CEO of Navajo Nation Gaming Enterprise, and was active as former chief of staff of the Navajo Nation Executive Branch. The Republicans on the commission, David Meal is from Pima County. He's a developer from Cottonwood, representing Cottonwood Properties, and Douglas York of Maricopa County is president of Ewing Irrigation. The chair, who is an independent, not affiliated with either party, is Dr. Erica Schupak Newberg. She's from Maricopa County. She's a psychologist and a life coach, has a practice in Chandler. She was a national board member of the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee and a board member of the Jewish Community Relations Council. So these are the people who really will do the job of drawing the maps in Arizona in this next year. Their job is as laid out in the Prop 106, is they must start with an absolute clean slate. And what that means, and that really, Patrick mentioned the sweetheart deals. This is intended to say no existing boundaries are the ones that we're going to use. So you can't say, this is my district, I want to preserve my district, you all go and do whatever you want, I'm going to keep my boundaries. So they start with an absolutely clean slate. The second thing that they do is that they then go, and both for the congressional, now remember, these folks only do congressional and legislative. They take the numbers that are given them from the census, and they just divide the state up in, from a congressional standpoint, into 9 districts, or divide the state up into 30 districts for legislating. And that process is pretty basic. It's just looking at population. Each one of the districts that they start with has a similar population. And then they get into the hard work. And this is really where you all can become involved and where all of us in the state of Arizona can become involved. So there is a 6 criteria that they use to ultimately get to the point of establishing the maps and the individual districts. They must comply with the United States Constitution and the Voting Rights Act. And as best as possible, each district that they draw should have equal population. The district should be compact and contiguous. That gets away from that district that I showed you and the salamander district of Eldridge Berry, where it just sort of goes up a line. They want them as best you can to be compact and contiguous districts. The next point is the districts must represent communities of interest. And this is something that I think that you all as an organization and that other organizations within Arizona need to look carefully at. There's no definition of what a community of interest is. We get to decide what is it that geographically is, where do we have a community that has like interests or like needs? And we want to make sure that those districts don't get divided, because if they get divided, then our power within those districts gets diluted. Quite frankly, if you have to go to 2 or 3 different representatives to represent your interest, you're not going to get as much attention as if you go to a single representative, both in Congress and in the state legislature, to represent you and your community of interest. So this is a real critical aspect as we move forward. It's still very vague, but it's very important to the process. And the district lines also, you see E, they should use geographic features as best as possible, follow town and county boundaries. This doesn't always match, but as best they can, so you don't have a community that's divided up into multiple districts, particularly in smaller towns. And the last item is the districts need to be competitive, where to do so would create no significant detriment to the other goals. So competitiveness being, we'll have an equal number of Republicans, Democrats, and independents in every district. That's important to create a very competitive district, but it's the last criteria. It's not the first ones that they look at when they start to draw maps. So when you get into the process, you start, I mean, here's here's the blank map that we started with, the grid map. And then from there, you can see that they start to adjust based on this criteria. And there will be dozens and dozens and dozens, if not more, of these maps that will be reviewed, created, refined, revised again and again until you get to the final map, which will be approved by the commission. The commission held its first meeting in January. The 4 partisan commissioners were sworn in. Their next meeting, those 4 people elected the chair, selected the chair and elected that person. And then they started their meetings February 2nd. They meet every Tuesday morning. In March, they made their first big hire. They hired their executive director. He was the chief of staff to a Republican Phoenix City Council member. It was a 3-2 vote. The chair voted with the 2 Republican members of the commission to select their executive director. In this case, the chair initially supported one of the Democratic finalists for the job, but couldn't get both Democrats to agree. And so she ended up voting for Brian Schmidt. The next big hire for them was April 6th. They hired legal counsel. In this case, they followed past criteria. and they have one law firm that is primarily Democratic focused and one law firm that is Republican focused. It was a unanimous vote, and they selected those two law firms to represent them going forward. The end of April, we finally got the apportionment data from the US Census Bureau. Normally that comes on December 31st. But because of all of the problems with the census last year, mostly from COVID, but also because of problems with the prior administration and how the census was set up, that information was delayed until April. And as Patrick mentioned, Arizona had expected to get 10 seats. They only got 9, which is what we have right now. And it's the first time since 1950 census that Arizona has not gained a seat in Congress. And as he said, there's a lot of reasons why, a lot of speculation, and who did what to whom and when and where and how and who didn't do things. And that's a whole nother conversation. The last major decision by the IRC was they hired their mapping consultants. This also was a very controversial decision. They agreed on a 3-2 vote to hire Timmons Group NDC. Once again, the 2 Republicans supported Timmons Group NDC, and the chair voted with the 2 Republicans for this group. The Democratic Party strongly opposed this hiring, primarily because NDC is led by a guy who has a fairly long history over the last 20 to 25 years. When he's been involved in redistricting, the maps that have been drawn have been challenged in court, and I shouldn't say all, but most cases have been found wanting, and primarily because they minimize the impact of the political impact of people of color, primarily in California and a little bit in North Carolina. California, there were 2 challenges because the maps that the NDC group drew minimized the Latino impact in those districts by separating the Latino population into multiple districts, and they were tossed out of court. So unfortunately, they did hire this group, and so they will be the ones, as mapping consultants, they do the technology behind the scenes. So they will actually draw the maps that the commissioners look at and see and evaluate. When they say they want some changes, they'll go back and redraw the maps. And that 2020 census, this is what we ended up with in Arizona: 7,158,923 people. That creates 9 congressional districts of about slightly more than 795,000 people per district, and 30 legislative districts with about 238,000. So these numbers are important, but the final maps will not reflect these precisely. It will depend on how the lines get drawn. So what do we do next? So there are public meetings, there's more hiring that needs to go on, and then there's the actual mapping process. There are no deadlines as to when this needs to be done. It was not in Prop 106. So basically, if it's not done by the spring of 2022, somebody will probably challenge the process, and it will end up that a 3-judge federal court panel will draw the lines for Arizona. There's no anticipation that this will happen. The biggest deadline that I think the commission faces is that in April of 2022, candidates for Congress and the state legislature need to turn in their petitions for those seats if you're running for office for either Congress or the state legislature. If you don't know what district you live in, it's much harder to do that. So consequently, the Arizona legislature did allow petition gathering to begin prior to redistricting, which means that you can gather signatures in your current district and then take those signatures if you end up in a different district and use those signatures to qualify for the ballot in those other districts. But that's the real time frame, is April is when that needs to be done. While this independent redistricting commission is doing its job, the same data, the same numbers that will be used by counties to redraw supervisor districts, the 5 supervisor districts in Maricopa County, the JP and constable districts, and also voting precincts. The county does that. It's separate and independent from the Independent Redistricting Commission. Those are approved by the Board of Supervisors. It'll be done by the Election Commission. As you know, Maricopa County has a 5-member Board of Supervisors, 4 of whom are Republicans. So we can assume, pretty fairly and reasonably that those districts will be drawn to the benefit of those 4 Republican members. And those lines must be done by 2022. Other political districts, municipalities, school boards, all of that are done by that entity and are not tied to any date at all. So you may see the same data used to redraw districts in, Tolleson or the city of Phoenix for their city council districts, but not until much later. Some of that is determined by city charters or school boards or other factors. It's the same data that is used, but it's used at a different time. So the real key to this is your involvement. And it's very important to get involved. Here's a couple of statements that this was when Prop 106 was being voted on or considered back in 2000. Lisa Graham Keegan, who was the superintendent of public instruction, and John Keegan, who was the mayor of Peoria, are Republicans. And they supported Prop 106 because of the public accountability factor. That prior to that, the maps were drawn in secret, and they were drawn in secret by the state legislature, but actually by a very small group within the legislature. Not all legislators even knew what was going on or what the maps were until they were finalized. And Janet Napolitano, who was the Attorney General of the state at that time, also supported it for the same reason, because it opened up the entire process to public scrutiny. It allowed us as the public to be involved in the process of where these lines are and how these maps get drawn. But of course, that really doesn't work unless you get involved. In 2011, there were 53 public hearings held all over Arizona by the Independent Redistricting Commission, and more than 3,500 Arizonans signed up to speak. It's important that we get involved because we know that from past experience, primarily from the 2011 cycle and a little bit from the 2001 cycle, that Republicans and in the case of 2011, Tea Party members were engaged in full force. I've chatted with one of the commissioners from the 2011 who talked about her, in some cases, absolute fear at the end of some meetings because of the harassment and disruption and the personal attacks, primarily by Tea Party members who were at the meetings and who were criticizing the action of the commission to try and intimidate them, to get them to draw districts that were more favorable to their point of view. So this really requires all of us to pay attention, to get involved, and to be willing to attend these meetings to explain our positions, our points of view, and to show the Independent Redistricting Commission that we really want to have a voice in how this is done. This isn't going to come out entirely the way that we want, but we want fairness and we want public scrutiny. And it works. The 2011 maps in 2 separate instances were evaluated for Arizona. The Associated Press did a study in 2011 that said, as you can see, that Arizona had the lowest measure of unequal representation among states, 4th out of the 43 states. And the Harvard Kennedy School said we ranked 1st in achieving a proportional translation of votes into seats. It's a hard and messy process, but when you shine the light on it, when you do it in public, it can work, and it can work very well. So let's talk a little bit about the next steps and then open it up to any questions that you all have. And I've breezed through these fairly quickly. Every Democratic legislative district in the state has a liaison like me, who is following the Independent Redistricting Commission and trying to report back to their local legislative district about what's going on. So if you're interested in the process, you can contact the Arizona Democratic Party or the Maricopa County Democratic Party, and they can put you in touch with their redistricting liaison. You can attend the meetings. The meetings are all online. They're all by Zoom right now, every Tuesday, 9 a.m. If you go to irc.az.gov, you can sign in and watch the meetings. You can comment on what's going on at the meetings, and they review public comment. I mean, I will tell you that having sat through a lot of governmental meetings in my time, this is another one. They go on at length on things that may not be of terrible interest right now. And frankly, there's not going to be a lot that happens in the next couple of months, because the next step in this process is, once again, we have to wait for the Census Bureau to give us what becomes the data that is used for actual redistricting. We have the data that determine how many congressional seats we get. And now the Census Bureau is going through in every census tract in the country and providing the information on how many people live in that census tract. And it's that data, that actual data of how many people are in Goodyear, how many people are in Chandler, what parts of Chandler are they, and the actual data beyond that, that starts the process of drawing maps. That information in years past was available in April to the states to begin the process. This year, they're hoping that they'll have it out at the end of July. There's some talk they may not get it until September. And all of a sudden that window becomes much smaller in terms of the process of how quick you can draw those maps, because you've got to start with the data. There's some, very sophisticated computer programs that will help people out, but they can be used in a lot of different ways. If you're exceptionally interested in all of this, there are training sessions available for folks through the Arizona Democratic Party, and I'm happy to help, and I'll give you my email address here in a little bit. Anybody who wants to get more involved in it. It's really the process that we use to determine who's going to represent us. And once it's finalized, it's what we got, folks. It's what we're stuck with for a decade. So this will be the districts that we have until the 2030 census, and really gets changed in 2031. So with that, sort of a very quick and brief overview, we can move on to questions. Let's see if I can get myself back. Patrick, any questions that you have out there or have seen any for us?
Yeah, we've got one question, and you kind of answered it, but I think we can definitely, go with that one again, though, is so as citizens, how can we make sure that it's a fair process?
Right. So the way to do that, and it takes work. This is not easy, because what it takes is you need to engage when the mapping process begins. At some point, they will create, after they get the data in July or whenever it happens, they'll start with that big initial map, and then they'll create a second map that says, this is where we initially think all 30 legislative districts should reside, and where all 9 congressional districts should be. And that's when you need to engage and to say, whoa, wait a minute. We have a community of interest, or we have a city, and it's being split. It's in 2 or 3 different legislative or congressional districts. This isn't right. This dilutes my ability to access democracy. And so that's when you need to step up. But what you need is someone who, either yourself or through the organization or through the Arizona Democratic Party, to take a look at these maps and to say, here are the areas that create problems for us. There are, folks within the Independent Redistricting Commission liaisons who are learning how to do the mapping process themselves. Clearly my technology skills aren't advanced enough to do that, but who can then draw districts on their own. So it really becomes one of, once that process starts, paying attention, understanding when there are public hearings. There should be public hearings throughout Arizona, a lot in Maricopa County, and it's showing up at the hearings, looking at the maps and saying, here's what I care about, here's my community, here's where I think you need to make sure that my community is represented. And it's a process that really takes all of our involvement, so they don't only hear from one side.
All right. Do you have any other questions regarding redistricting?
So is it a matter for clarity purposes, a volume in response saying it is your displeasure with how the lines are drawn, or would just an organizational statement make a tremendous difference?
So that's a great question. And I think that volume can help, but volume isn't going to be the only answer. For instance, if you have 100 people who come on and say in the exact same language, cut and paste, here's what I want,
Mm-hmm.
you know, as a commissioner, you may minimize the impact of that, 100 people. However, if you have it, you know, that combined with an organization such as the Maricopa County NAACP that says, look, we oppose this map for these very specific reasons. We believe that this has a detrimental impact on the people who are part of our organization.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that has value. But the problem in really answering that is, you know, it's up to the 5 commissioners and how they evaluate the public input. And there really is no standard. I mean, Arizona is one of the few states that now this will be the 3rd time that we've done this. So we've got some history and we've done fair maps,
Mm-hmm.
but it's how these 5 people view that process that will be the overriding determinant.
Mm.
I have a question.
Is there a period of time? Oh,
Go ahead.
is there a
ahead.
period of time after they initially draw the map that there's a comment period that's allowed where people can comment on what they feel would be a fair
Right.
redistricting?
So one of the things that will happen is the commission between now and when they get the data from the census, they're going to, it's my understanding, they're going to establish that process. Every commission for each of the last 2, you know, did that on their own. They determined how many public hearings, where the public hearings are, and what the process will be in terms of evaluating public impact or input to those maps. The hope is that, and in the past, what they would do is they would create the maps, put them out, and then open it up for public input. So you could come on and evaluate it. You could, you know, you could drill down and find out that, you know, the legislative district boundary went right, you know, down my street, and me and my neighbors are in different districts, which is silly. And so you could comment on that. So that information will be available. The key clearly, and one of the things that we're talking about as liaisons, is how to get the word out to all of you and to everyone that now is the time to step up. The maps are available. They're ready for review. Here's some of the concerns we see. What are your concerns? And we hope to find an easy way to get that information out so you can become involved.
Yeah. I had a question about, you kind of answered it just then when you said as a liaison, you'll try to get the information out. But it might, let's see, my concern is the entire package of voter suppression, right? And understanding how this gerrymandering could perhaps aid in voter suppression. So I guess my question really is, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, that people have to make some noise, we have to agitate at a vocal, high vocal level. So I guess as these maps are being drawn, because like I said, I could see them as potentially being another method of voter suppression.
Right.
And so I'm putting it together with the total attack on voter suppression. So will you give, through Patrick and through our political action committee, would you be the pinpoint person who will alert us immediately that these maps are ready and you need to look at them to determine if it's lopsided? You know,
Right.
Is it favoring one group over another, especially when you say, when the information, not you, you know, individually, but when you say that this is the first time that Arizona has not gained, you know, in the areas. So it just, it's just another voter. It could potentially be another voter suppression. So we need to know how to be actively engaged, how we can make sure that we get the word out to our allies as soon as possible that the maps are ready for review, right?
So Dr. Hardin, I'll jump in on this one. So actually, you do have somebody in-house who can get you that information. I'm a part of the redistricting committee with my legislative district.
Okay.
So I get all the alerts and information regarding redistricting. So I'll definitely be sharing that as part of the political action committee with our updates that we normally put out with everything that's going on in the legislature or locally that takes place. So so we'll definitely and especially since we're getting to the end of the legislative session, we're going to start moving that information more to the top of the list of alerts and call to actions.
Okay, and just one last comment, and I'll let it. I won't dominate the conversation, but in the next 10 or 15 minutes that we have, like I said, is I add this gerrymandering as potential voter suppression, and I would like for us to have a discussion, a collective discussion on what can we do, how do we elevate the entire voter suppression activities that are going on, like the bills that are being presented and passed and signed, and how do we wake people up and let them know, democracy is in danger, so that's where I would like collectively for folks to maybe, even if we ask everybody on the call, what can they do to stop these voter suppression things? And I see there's another hand up, so maybe go to that hand and come back and let's have an open dialogue on how do we elevate the agitation? How do we get busy? Because that's my comment. So okay. Yeah.
I think Marcia has a question.
I do, and
Marcia.
here's my question. There's one thing for people like myself who would be interested in being a voice, but I don't necessarily have the background. There's another thing to be educated, but there are those who have an integral background of training who should be encouraged to be active. And I'm wondering if Mr. Moore or someone in the audience can say, what kind of background should there be? Should there be people who are attorneys or, architects or land surveyors? I mean, what kind of background should we be seeking? And that's my question.
From my perspective, I think that there is some very technical background that is useful at one point, which is in the art of drawing the maps themselves, but very few people have that. And I think from a public input, I spent a little time reviewing some of the public input from 10 years ago and trying to assess which had value. And I think that from what I could gather, although it's useful to have an expertise, what really becomes valuable, I think, to the members of the commission is for all of us individually, regardless of our training, regardless of our background, to be able and willing to step up and to say, this map that you've drawn disenfranchises me, and here's why. Or my community of interest, my physical community, whatever it may be, and to be able to explain very clearly as to why this line has that impact on me personally as a voter in the state of Arizona. And I think it's that voice as a voter in the state of Arizona that gives us all the power to be able to stand up and be heard by this commission.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that. There are different layers to, of course, involvement with this particular issue. So, I would say if you feel passionate about redistricting and being, having a voice, don't say, I don't have a legal background. I don't have expertise in mapping. Don't let that dissuade you from being involved. There are a number of groups that are already starting to mobilize on the legal end. And they're also gathering those experts in mapping and those type of things. So what's really like, and I'm going to echo what John said, what's really, really powerful and what's really, really important is for the commission to hear from, you know, your regular, say, John Q or Jane Q voter or resident to express it like, hey, you know, I live in this particular community. I've looked at this map and this diminishes my community and will negatively impact, you know, our ability to participate in this democracy. Right. So that's probably the biggest thing. And what I would also throw out there is, you know, having those conversations with people in your community. You know, they're going to be, like I said, for example, a group like Progress Arizona is going to be doing a lot of work to, you know, get the word out there. You know, of course, the Democratic Party will get the word out there and things like that. But still, nothing beats the personal conversation. So if you know 4 people, say just 4 people who are not really understanding or engaged or aware of this, just, you know, now especially that things are getting a little bit safer to do so, but, you know, just having coffee and just talking about these type of things and just saying like, hey, were you aware? And, you know, getting them kind of organized, say, hey, you know, they're going to be talking about this stuff. Let's get together and write our responses together and get that submitted in so they can hear from us. That type of stuff is really powerful because, you know, there's that old saying when it comes to this is one of the most important things that happens in Arizona every 10 years that most of the population doesn't pay attention to.
I have a question. And I agree with everything that I've heard here. I am so incensed by everything that has been taking place. And I concur, Dr. Harton, that gerrymandering is a form of voter suppression, without a doubt. My question is this: when you begin to think of the masses, and I personally have an interest in a population that may not come to the table, such as those of us who are here right now, to listen and be a part of it. And I do think that we need to have the general public engaged and to have some knowledge about what's happening, and they need to be ignited into action, if you will. There are things that are taking place right now that I'm feeling the necessity to fight for, or things that have already taken place that I feel the necessity to fight for. Yet, when you think in terms of gerrymandering, that's going to have long-term implications as well, further down the road. How do you think the energies, in other words, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do we deal with some things that are happening? If I'm going to sit down with 4 people right now, am I really, and it may be dictated by the skills that they have, Marcia, as you said, maybe that's going to dictate how I would channel them or engage them or prompt them to become engaged. But do I deal with the current decisions that are being made? Do you think they will understand it? Or do you think we just have a smaller cohort of individuals who are working on this concept here and deal with that? Because I think for me, even it is an abstract. It is an abstract until you hear it. So when you go out to the general population and you say, I want you to be involved, I'm going to have coffee with you, or whatever you're going to have with them, is there any reason why we should really focus more on one than the other? Not saying in the degree of attention that you give to it. I guess that's what I'm asking. Where is our most urgent need? Although everything is urgent, and I understand the intersectionality of everything that's going on here. That's quite crystal clear to me.
So like I said, and definitely, you know, everybody else chime in, but With the groups that I work with, when it comes to like what you're talking about, you're exactly right, because a lot of these really huge issues are they're up here. I don't know if y'all can see my hand anymore, but they're up here type of things for a lot of people. So the approach that we take, and like, you know, is making this stuff tangible. So like, for example, if a person has children, their child is probably going to a public school. So if you're going to have it, so let's say the conversation is going to be about redistricting. So let's talk about, you know, where their child goes to school. Does their child, are they in district? Are they out of district? And so get them to understand what those boundary lines mean. Meaning that, okay, because you live in district, your child will always have a seat at that school. But if the line got changed or moved and you became out of district, while yes, you can send your child to any school, you know, in town, the kids who live in district get that priority. So then there becomes a possibility your child can't go to the school that you really like, that you really want your child to continue with, if the lines were to change.
Gotcha.
And that's a real tangible thing. So then you just build it up from there, because then you can start talking about another tangible issue. It could be something along the lines of economics, property taxes. It could be who deals with the property tax? How does that change if you can't have a say in the laws at the legislature that impact that? And so really it's starting with something that they're interested in, or that has tangible impact. Because I mean, you know, when I said earlier about, you know, having and sitting that conversation, you know, if I'm with like 4 of the people who are at my level of this knowledge, our conversation is going to look differently than if I'm sitting with, say, 3 other people who are not really engaged in the process. So more of it is what's important to you, what do you care about, and then tying this topic to something that is of great importance to them.
And just to expand on that, just very briefly.
Go on, John, please, John, I want to hear you.
I was just going to add on to that. I mean, Patrick's absolutely spot on, and that's been our experience, my experience. But it's finding, and most people are not as engaged as we are. Most people are not connected with politics and government the way that we are. And it doesn't impact their lives on a daily basis. They don't follow it. And so what you need to do is you need to find what it is. As Patrick pointed out, education is a huge factor in so many families' lives. And if you start with education and you start with the idea, as he mentioned, in district boundaries, one of the other aspects you can say is, if you're unhappy with the decisions that have been made about funding for your kids' schools, or those kinds of decisions that have happened over the last few years, this is why redistricting is important. Because if you allow people who made those decisions to redistrict themselves into a permanent position, we will have another decade of these same decisions in Arizona. And so the idea is, let's find out what it is that they care about today. If it is something that's happened to them that we can point directly to decisions by legislators or members of Congress, and you flip that forward and say, look, if you don't get involved in redistricting, if you don't understand this, then you're going to live with these same people for a decade, or people similar.
You know, it's interesting, because with and I'm going to be quiet after this, but as Dr. Harden was saying, I think that the buzz needs to be out there. A lot of what you are saying to me is what the very same strategy that we were using when we were trying to work the census, and telling people it's so important for you to participate in the census. And we tried to personalize it then to say it's crucial that you become involved. And then for me, I take it, even when I talk about intersectionality, when I look at a bill that now you cannot teach ethnic studies, or and you say you educate. So there is this huge push of voter suppression that's hitting us from all different angles. Because when you say educate, they're even trying to siphon out the education in the public school system for people to even know how the system works. So it's a monumental task that we're looking at right now with the democracy in these United States of America. It's really a monumental task.
One of
Now,
the things
there's a
that I
real,
always have to remind myself of when I'm thinking about this and talking to people is you use the term voter suppression, which is absolutely spot on to what's going on. But a lot of the people I talk to don't fully understand what that means. So
No.
I try and take it down to a level that says this decision was made and this is the impact on you very specifically.
Mhm.
And that's what voter suppression is all about, or that's what education funding
Yeah.
or charter schools or whatever the issue. But trying to remember for myself is that I know the voter suppression is a shorthand for a lot of things, and
Yeah.
I've got to sort of avoid using the shorthand for people who
Sure,
may not
right.
be as
Mhm.
connected and involved as I am.
now there's a comment in the chat, and Christina, if you're comfortable, if you'd like to unmute, because it's a really powerful statement. I think it's something that should be shared. So if you're comfortable unmuting, please share your comment with the rest of us.
Hi. Um, yeah. And I'm glad we're having a conversation. This is good. um, I've been wanting to join a protest about all of these bills, but I don't know of anyone who's been creating anything. I recently wrote some legislators, and I wrote other people too, about these bills, Arizona recount and the bill that would fine teachers, Arizona teachers, for talking about things like racism in school.
Mhm.
I've been reading the political action emails and I do appreciate them. But yes, it would be so nice to do actions and help educate the community and be in solidarity with folks. It kind of seems, honestly, like my recent thoughts were that maybe, oh, this is a lot to say, but like it would be good to create an educational program. Seems like that, like educational programming to really help people take action. That might be a good next step, some good next steps. Anyway, just my thoughts while just hearing everyone talk. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you for
That's
sharing
good.
those thoughts. I think
Yeah,
it's a
thank you.
fantastic idea
Yeah.
for to really keep this going. I do want to address a couple of things. So unfortunately, some of those bills have been signed into law.
Mhm.
So what, you know, what that basically means at this point is we're looking at individual, and I'll kind of speak in general and being general about it, is like what happens next ultimately is that it's going to have to go to the courts, meaning that there are, I know in some situations, lawsuits are already ramping up to challenge these laws in court. And of course, that can be a longer process. When we think about voter suppression, and we think about, redistricting, things like that, we have to, I always say, is that chicken and the egg approach, is that what we're seeing, just looking at the legislation that has been passed, or the legislation still hanging out there, these are the tangible examples of why it's important for folks to get registered to vote, why it's important for folks to, attend educational events like this or have these discussions, because ultimately not participating in the process leads to this. So, this is not probably the most hopeful way to put it, but I'm going to try and wrap it in a hopeful bow. What we're seeing happen in the legislature is a direct response to the large turnout of voters in this previous election. And so, because in Arizona, the way the elections turned out, at least at the state and local levels, you're seeing a backlash of individuals who, did not like the overall outcome in this election. And so now they are, pushing, and it's not just Arizona. You're seeing this in Arizona, Georgia, Colorado, Missouri. I mean, across the nation, you're seeing laws just like what's happening here. It's a very, very concerted effort. And so what we have to do in this interim is educate the community, make sure they understand that this is what this stuff means, but then also help them understand that we have an election coming up in 2022, a midterm election. So that's our next part, where we have to then take electoral action to either mitigate some of this or potentially reverse it. And so that's the big thing, is that people understanding that, at this stage of the game, it's about damage control. It's about trying to mitigate how bad it's going to be, but it's not. We're not in a position to reverse these laws now, but we have to start working towards a point where we can then do that.
Patrick, I understand what you're saying there, but I think that what Christina is saying is that this might be one of those call to arms kind of thing that we can use to mobilize more people in an active protest kind of way in order to get people to understand that the education part about these laws that just happened, that if we don't do something about it, it's going to get worse. We're not in a position where it's going to get better if we are complacent. We better do something now or it's going to get worse. And it's going to be at the point where people are going to feel that it's irreplaceable. But we just shown by this last election that they're running scared. All of these voter suppression laws are in place to stop us from doing what we've already done. And what we got to do is take that momentum and move it forward and be more, I don't want to say aggressive, but more assertive in our position that this is just wrong, and help more people see why it's wrong and see if we can do something about it.
Karen, I think aggressive is definitely probably appropriate adjective for this.
I was trying not to be the angry black man, you know what I'm saying? I'm just, okay.
Very good. Are there any other questions in the chat that you see, Patrick?
I see. I'm sorry. It's Marcia?
Yeah.
Marcia? You go ahead. You have your hand up. Is it Marcia? Oh.
You're on mute.
Oh, you're still muted.
Okay, so I'm thinking about the teachers' unions. And how has NAACP Maricopa or any other NAACP in the country worked with teachers' unions to get them to become very proactive about this, to be courageous about this, to be able to use the parent base to support them and to use this as the educational process? I would think that on different levels of education, on colleges as well, this can be done. I mean, I don't know much about Arizona, but I know that here in Tucson, we have school districts that are very concerned about disenfranchisement. And is there a process in place already that we can draw on? How do we do it? And my last thing is, because I live in Pima County, and you're really talking about the real influences up in Maricopa, how do we get involved? Would it be then through our NAACP here in Tucson, Arizona?
Can I speak to that? In terms of process, what I would suggest in terms of process is the folks on the call who are saying that they want to get involved. I keep using the word agitate. I think that might be a W.E.B. Du Bois. His word of what we need to do is agitate. But connect with our political action committee, because when we need everybody's input on what needs to be done next. Our political action committee has some ideals and some action steps that they're planning to take. But Patrick, if you'll put our branch email in the chat for me, email the branch and I will connect you with our political action committee, because I am in agreement with what everybody is saying, is that I think it's Marion, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, it's like, it's overwhelming. What are the pieces? How do we get this done? Well, it's like a little bit at a time, and you have to do it on all different fronts. And so if we, there is a process, the NAACP process. Let's start with our committee level, right? Start at the committee level, and all these different ideals can work. Letters, calls to, I mean, let me see. We already have some things in place. We send, especially our political action committee, they're on top of it. It's like, hey, this is happening. Call your legislator, write your legislature. There's so many different things we can do. And I think we have to take multiple strategies to try to impact. Some of us might be able to make a phone call. Some of us might be able to write op-eds. Some of us might be able to, there's like lots of ways that we can try to address this problem, and we have to address it right now. So I would recommend, please, those of you that want to help us address, to do things right now, send us an email. I'll connect you with our political action committee so we can do things. Like one action item is June 19th, Dr. Westenberg, 19th.
Right.
Dr. Westenberg is going out to a hip hop event. It's a Juneteenth event, but it might be a younger demographic, next gen demographic that we're trying to influence, motivate to help us do these things. So, there's a lot to be done. Huh?
And I was going to say, and then there are some young people who are in touch or are practitioners of hip hop culture who have been a part of the NAACP, have been officers in the NAACP, have been officers at the National Convention that will be there also, who will be able to help channel the message to those young people. And it will be an array of messages that we will be giving along with voter registration. And I do think that that when we think in terms of the public, we tend to view them and think of them often as just ourselves. And we have to realize that you have this rainbow of people out here, and we're just going to have to go out there. We're going to have to be sojourners and go out there and touch them and knock on their door, because they're not always going to come to our door.
Okay.
So we have to go
my
and
point
knock on
was,
their door and meet them on their terms with their language, as was when you were saying voter suppression may not be the term to use. So yeah, we're trying to do it in modules.
So my point, let me summarize my point. My point is to keep it from being overwhelming, right? To keep it from being overwhelming, we need more people, and different people can do different things based on the things that individual people are interested in. We have to attack this problem of tearing down democracy from so many different angles, and whichever is your area of interest, there can be projects created to get that done. The other question is the NAACP connecting with teachers? I would say that I would venture to say, especially on the national level, they are connecting with all the gamut, and that's what we have to do. We have to bring in allies from all kind of areas that want to work on a common, for this common direction of recognizing everybody's right to vote, and that stop putting roadblocks up for folks who want to vote, and you can't overturn somebody's vote. So I guess I'm just giving you an invitation to email us. I'll connect you with our political action committee, and there's no small task. Everything can be helpful, right? Calls, op-eds, there's lots of ways that we have to work immediately. Marcia, if you'd like to see what they're doing in Tucson, I can connect you with the president there, to see if if they're actively doing anything. And like when your group was working, because people would say, well, why are people in Tucson connecting with the Maricopa County branch? Well, because we were taking action last year. And the phone banking was phenomenal based on our political action committee. Also, we were in the middle, the branches were in the middle of elections. So the branch in Tucson just transitioned from one officers to another officers, but we can, I'll get you in contact with them so you can see what they're doing, if they're doing something more than what we're doing. But for me, there's enough work to go around. We don't have to be, it doesn't matter who's getting it done. Let's just get it stopped across the country. And yes,
Yes,
Maria.
Marion.
Maria, did I do it right? Okay.
Marion, it's Marion.
Marion, I'm sorry, Marion. Okay.
I'm also in Pima County, but I was connected with the phone banking project that the Maricopa group is doing. And I think one of the reasons for that, several reasons. One is that we got that information and we partnered, the group I was in partnered with Camila as an individual and got the information about that. So I think, you know, the challenge for me is that every day, and the rest of you may have this too, I get multiple emails, multiple texts, you know, from every organization around, and they all support, I mean, they're all organizations that are in line with my beliefs, but every day they want money, every day they want letters, every day they want, I mean, I cannot tell you like how many things I have sent to senators in the last, you know, whenever time. So I think for someone like myself who really wants to be involved, but you know, may have a limited amount of time, I think when people are able to give you a specific task and say, here's the task, do it in this time frame, do it when you can, but in this general time frame, it really helps. And also, I don't know if this is correct or not, but part of aligning with the Maricopa branch, and this I don't know if this is a relevant issue, because I feel like I know more about what's going on with Maricopa County than I do about what's going on with Pima County, which is silly because I live here. But I have felt as though Maricopa County, in terms of the size of it and the impact in elections or voter suppression, is going to be more critical to where Arizona goes. I feel like Tucson in general is a little more liberal, a little more democratic, a little more, you know, it's already a little more solid in terms of, not that we don't need to mobilize, but I feel like up there we need to mobilize more, and there are more communities in danger. So I don't know if that's correct, but I think it does speak to the idea of what do you get involved in, how much do you get involved, when do you get involved? You know, I haven't been doing all that much between the Georgia election and now, other than to, you know, try to be keeping up with educating myself and, you know, sending emails to representatives, sending, you know, donations. But I think with regard to some of this stuff, the more we can have specific tasks that you say, hey, could you do this week? It's more likely for people like me and for other people I know who want to have an impact but don't want to, you know, fully commit their time and energy to politics, to be able to get involved and make a difference.
But I think when everybody does a little bit, that's what makes it work. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, and also just to let you know, I have been in communication with the NAACP president in Pima County, and we've talked. So it's not like we are stealing you away from there. I've already talked with her and, you know, explained to her why we were highlighting you as one of our community awardees. And it sort of started with, you guys know Paul, what's Paul's last name? Paul here in Phoenix called me. He's with the Jewish Task Force here in the Phoenix area, Maricopa area. And I think he's the one who then sent the information out to you, but in Tucson. But we just all have to do what we can do. And
Well,
I'm like you, like you get one of those and they want money. So, but if you can't give money, at least give time. You know, that's how I justify it, is like, I'm trying to give some time. So, but every little bit helps us in this big project.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a matter for me of how do you splinter it? Like, you're right. And it's not even that I mind giving money. It's just how much do you give into whom? Because when you get 7, 8, 9 emails, just when you wake up in the morning,
yeah, exactly.
all of these organizations are asking for money. Do we splinter it? Do we give? What I've been doing is, all the organizations, a little bit here, a little bit there. But, is there a better, maybe, what Karen is saying is right. We don't have to worry about splintering our efforts if we're all doing a little piece. But I worry sometimes that if we splinter our efforts, it will be diluted and not have as much impact.
So Marion, I want to let you know, I feel your pain when it comes to that. I'm someone who also, I get emails about everything, and sometimes it does feel very overwhelming. The advice that I give to this response is, like I said, unless like you do this for a living or you just can really multitask over multiple issues, is I would say, break it down to maybe your top 3 most important things that you care about, that you want to be involved in, and just focus your energy on that. Because as Dr. Harden said, is that, if people just do a little, it does go a long way. Because, with every probably major issue that the NAACP has to deal with, there are countless people working on that. So, just adding, focusing on, let's say voter suppression. You say, like, that's going to be my thing. I'm going to put my energy towards voter suppression. That's where I'm going to donate my money. That's where I'm going to go. You're being a part of the solution. You're helping, that issue, because undoubtedly there is somebody who has the exact same feeling, but it's about education funding, and they're going to put their time, their energy, and they're going to put money behind education funding. And so in that regard, those issues are always going to be met. It's kind of that classic, the house is on fire and you have the water bucket line, that kind of thing. If we all are throwing water at everything, we're not gonna put the fire out. But if we coordinate and say, okay, this is my bucket, I'm gonna make sure my bucket's full, and so going to that fire, we'll get the fire out.
Everyone, I think I have heard the bell ring for this Zoom session. But you know what? The dialogue has been wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. It is apparent that we are all committed, that is without a doubt, and that we will continue to be committed, and that we will continue to take action. What I would like to say is, from the Political Action Committee, we have heard some suggestions and ideas that certainly when we reconvene, we've been texting each other, that we are going to embrace and try to see if we cannot bring it to fruition. And I cannot thank you enough for being here today. Thank you, Patrick, for your presentation at the beginning. And have we lost our presenter here?
John texted me. He had another obligation he had to Zoom off to, but he wanted me to express that, thank you for giving him the opportunity to share this information and to participate in the discussion.
And will you please reciprocate that? We really appreciate it, because gerrymandering is really a very difficult and comprehensive topic area. And with that being said, Dr. Harden, our president of the Maricopa County branch of the NAACP, I will hand it back over to you. Once you unmute.
Yep. Heartfelt thanks to everyone on the call. Hope this information was informative, and thank you so much for joining our call. We have our membership meeting, community meeting. You don't have to be a paid member to join our 11:30 meetings. Please come back 4 Saturdays, well, the 4th Saturday of the month again. And those of you that want to coordinate with us of what we're doing to try to make sure democracy prevails, I would say join us in June. And I would just add, this is a little connected or a little off, but it's democracy. It's like saving democracy. I think whenever you're talking to people about the insurrection, January 6th, please keep reminding people that people lost their lives that day. So for people to say, oh, it was just a regular tourist day, the question is, well, how many days do the tourists get killed? You know, if it was just a regular tourist day, how often do people lose their lives touring the Capitol? Because if we let it go this time, it will happen again and again and again and again and again. So thank you all for your passion and willingness to help us agitate, because if I knew how to operate my machine, I would have my sign behind my head that says, protect the vote, never gonna give it up. And we just have to be steadfast, you know? When we get tired, take a nap, get up and start again. I said, you know, if our ancestors had gotten tired and quit, where would we be? So thank you very much. Keep doing what you're doing, and please email us so I can connect you with our political action person, because there's lots of different ways that we got to keep this in the forefront and not let it die down. Like there's multiple ways. I'm working with another group, like an op-ed that might be coming out like this coming week, you know, so there's many ways that we can contribute. Thank you so much, everyone, right? Have a safe Saturday afternoon.